Welcome to the Real News Network in Baltimore. I'm Kim Brown. Whether he wins or loses, Donald Trump's presidential campaign has coalesced the far right-wing faction of the U.S. alternative right, now commonly known as the alt-right, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center. The alt-right is a set of far-right ideologies, groups, and individuals whose core belief is that white identity is under attack by multicultural forces, and it is characterized by heavy use of social media and online memes. Now, alt-righters tend to eschew establishment conservatism, and they skew a little bit younger. They also embrace white ethno-nationalism as a fundamental value. Now, according to our next guest, the alt-right seems to have got their playbook from the fossil fuels industry attack on climate science and climate scientists. And our guest should know, as he has been covering the right-wing attacks on climate science for many years in his highly popular website titled Climate Denial Crock of the Week at climatecrock.com. And I'm happy to be joined once again with Peter Sinclair. He's joining us today from Midland, Michigan. Peter is a videographer. He's a regular contributor to the Yale Climate Connections. He's also media director of the Dark Snow Project, an international team of researchers and climate communicators. Welcome back to the Real News, Peter.
So happy to be back.
Well, Peter, talk to us about the basic points in which the attacks on the climate scientists appear to have been the template for the alt-right campaign that we have seen this election season. What are the strategies that you see coinciding?
Well, some of your readers might remember that in 2009, there was a hack at the Climate Research Unit at the University of East Anglia in the UK. And some party managed to break in and get 10 years worth of emails back and forth, personal communication between some leading climate scientists. And not only did they get the emails, someone combed through them very deliberately to pull out scraps of conversation, parts of sentences, phrases that could be distorted, taken out of context, and were then actually weaponized and injected into the media dialogue, starting with, of course, the right-wing noise machine, but eventually made its way through the mainstream media as well. Notably, one of the primary vectors initially for this was the website of a then little-known broadcaster named Alex Jones out of Austin, Texas, someone who has recently risen to quite a bit of prominence, but who has been a rabid science denier for quite a few years. And also, there were a number of postings. There was a big push on far-right, white supremacist, and neo-Nazi websites where the photos, the names, and the addresses of a number of prominent scientists were posted, along with notations as to whether they were Jewish or not, and encouragement for people to threaten them, to try to intimidate them, and to go after them in as many ways as possible. They're starting at that time, a number of these scientists have been subjected to really, really foul, disgusting kinds of abuse, anything from nasty emails right up to telephone threats to their family, dead animals on the doorstep, things of that nature. We have a name for this now. It's called stochastic terror. In other words, if you have a target that you want to intimidate or terrorize, you don't necessarily go after them personally, but you use social media, like, for instance, ISIS does, to put your message out in the hope that some loose cannon out there will go off and do something that you can then take credit for, or that you can just sort of hold over the head of some adversary that you want to intimidate. And we've seen that kind of thing. We've seen all of these techniques now rolled out on a national stage in the U.S. election. It's almost as if someone was road testing these techniques against climate scientists, and now they're playing out on a large scale, directed against, it would seem, the U.S. democracy and Constitution itself. Now, another key element here that was talked about at the time, because we still don't know who did that original hack. But I was and have been in touch with a number of these key scientists since then, and one of the leading theories about the perpetrator was that this was an operation hatched in Russia. Russia being a state that is heavily reliant on fossil fuels and has some enormous gas and oil interests.
Well, Peter, that actually leads me to the next question, because, I mean, what you're talking about in terms of the hack from 2010, I think they called that Climategate. That's what it was dubbed. Is that right?
Yeah.
So is it more than speculation to say that there is a connection to Russia, as you mentioned, along with the hack on the Democratic Party? And is there also a possible oil interest agenda at work?
Well, the current hacks, I think, have been pretty well documented, and from what I've heard, the intelligence agencies in the U.S. are more or less unanimous that the current hacks do come from Russia. And what is really suggestive and kind of worrisome is whether that points back to the Russians being behind the Climategate hack, and whether this is kind of a long-term pattern that they've been working out, kind of ironing out the bugs and trying different things to see what works, and now deploying against the media. And the U.S. media seems to be uniquely vulnerable to this kind of attack, although maybe there are signs they're getting a little more sophisticated. But the way it works with emails is you simply introduce into the conversation that there are emails that raise questions. And of course, raising questions is the very heart of the climate denial, the science denial industry, going back into the tobacco disinformation days. You know, the idea that doubt is our product. And as long as you can raise questions about emails that, of course, very few people have read, very few journalists will have read, but they simply throw this out into the conversation as if there was some substance to it, and you already have distorted the conversation. You've distorted people's perception of what's going on. In the case of climate science, you've led people to believe that there's some kind of cabal of scientists that are plotting to distort or deceive the information that they're putting out. So it's been effective.
Right, and you mentioned Alex Jones, who is a big alt-right figure. He places himself under the banner of being a civil libertarian, but he's a climate change denier, and he's one of the key proponents of the alt-right scene, and he's long played up global warming as part of a conspiracy to control the population. But let's take a look at a clip of Donald Trump on his show back in December before he got the Republican nomination.
You have a president that doesn't even want to talk about, you know, the radical Muslim stuff. He doesn't want to mention the word. He doesn't want to say it. But you look at what's happening where we have a president that's over there celebrating global warming and trying to get everybody excited about global warming, like that's our number one problem. He considers that to be our number one problem. And our number one problem is what's going on where they want to blow up our cities and they want to blow up our country. That's our number one problem.
That was Donald Trump appearing on the Alex Jones Show, InfoWars. Now, Alex Jones has ties to the John Birch Society, a group that was supported by the fossil fuel giant Koch Industries, owned by brothers David and Charles Koch, who are infamous for funding climate change denial. And indeed, so was their father, Fred Koch. He was also a member. So talk about the rise of the alt-right here, Peter. These ideologues like Alex Jones and the history of pursuing client scientists.
Well, it's, we're seeing globally the rise of a number of far-right groups. This is going on in Europe also. And notably, it's being aided, abetted, and encouraged by Russia in Europe. That's information that's been pretty widely reported. We don't really know what the relationship of Russia to the climate denial industry is, but it's it certainly it bears some consideration given the power, the sophistication, and the reach of the attacks that they're capable of mounting. And our news cycle, our news media today is somewhat vulnerable to this because they are stretched so thin by the 24-hour news cycle. Reporters, even good journalists, have a difficult time keeping up with things that are pouring out of the fire hose on the internet. And frankly, there's a whole lot of not so good journalists out there who are simply too lazy or intellectually unequipped to follow these threads down and find out if they're even real. So there's a whole lot of just nonsense far-right talking points that have made their way into what we would hope would be serious news conversation. This whole idea about climate science being a hoax has been adopted by this rabid far right wing as an article of faith, and the breadth of the gap between the real world and the alternative universe of the alt-right has become so wide that when I'm approached by these people and they start rattling off their talking points to me, the first question is, where do we even begin? Where do we even begin to set this right? Because they are so far split off. And that's probably always been with us in terms of a very small subset of the U.S. population, but now, with the help of Fox News and talk radio and the internet, a lot of these ideas are creeping into kind of mainstream conversation, and media people, journalists that know better, are repeating them and normalizing them as if they're real, and that's really kind of appalling and a bit terrifying to me.
Well, Peter, I mean, do you think that Trump has so changed the mainstream media discourse that even if he doesn't win, we're going to see the presentation of these ideas and these conspiracies from the alt-right being presented and giving legitimate weight, or, you know, the sort of, we have to hear the both sides argument, even if one side doesn't really have a lot of merit?
Right, and that would be another example about how the science denial debate has kind of bled over into the larger arena. The issue with science denial has always been the issue of false balance, that media people who are uninformed about the science, they feel from a journalistic perspective that they have to present both sides, as if there are two sides as to whether cigarettes are bad for your health, or whether HIV causes AIDS, or whether climate change is real and dangerous and human caused. There are not two sides. There are not two equal sides. So it is a false balance to bring these things in there, and so we're seeing some of the same kinds of things happen in the election now nationally, which are leading the conversation into areas that are in no way relevant to the real policies that Americans should be considering before they vote.
Indeed. Well, we've been speaking with Peter Sinclair. Peter is a videographer. He's a regular contributor to the Yale Climate Connections. He's also media director of the Dark Snow Project, which is an international team of researchers and climate communicators. And his website is climatecrocs.com. He's been joining us today from Michigan. Peter, we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for watching The Real News.